everyone. I'm Anu. I'm the founder of Stimulus Coaching. We are higher education and career counselors. And today we are talking about careers in law. And we've done previous events on careers, and all of those are available on our website. It's called stimuluscoaching.wordpress.com. And our guest for today is Elaine Banton, and she is a human rights, employment, and discrimination barrister, amongst other things. So very welcome, Elaine. And could you please tell us a bit more about yourself and the work that you do?
Yes, well, as you've described, I do employment, equality law, discrimination law, and human rights that intersects with those areas. And that includes really across the board. I'm very often in the employment tribunal or in the higher appellate courts in England, so Employment Appeal Tribunal and the Court of Appeal as well. I undertake cases where I haven't appeared below, but I'm dealing with appeal matters.
Sure. And where did you study, Elaine? Was it in the UK itself?
Yes, I studied in the UK and I've always practiced in the UK. So I did both my degree and my master's degree in the UK, but I have actually spent some time working in the States.
Right. Okay, great. So I think law is a really vast field, and we are facing some aspect of it every day, be it driving rules or buying a property, employment, renting a home, etc. We are always we need to work within the framework that law has provided us. So if you like to be dealing with healthcare, you can build a career that crosses healthcare and law, or technology and law, or a whole lot of possibilities. So the usual routes being, becoming a solicitor or barrister or chartered legal executive, paralegal, but there's also plenty of other jobs to consider, like arbitrators, legal executives, company secretaries. Elaine, would you tell us a bit about solicitor versus barrister and how, their profiles differ a bit?
Well, yes, I mean, you've set the sort of context there very helpfully. And you're right, there are so many different areas of law that you can go into and practice. And also, you could work in-house, for example, as well as working commercially. So that gives you a lot of different choices. Yeah. I think in terms of solicitor versus barrister, if I start with the bar, because that's what I am, a barrister, and you would generally have a degree. It doesn't have to actually be a law degree, because you can take the GDL afterwards, and so you can then go on. You can actually study something as an undergraduate that you're really passionate about, and then decide to go into law, which is what a lot of people do. You would then need to do your bar finals and obtain a pupillage. So it does take quite a few years of study and dedication to get to the stage where you could potentially become a pupil barrister. It's fiercely competitive. For some, it takes years, and I'm not exaggerating. And so it's really useful to try and build your CV as much as you can in terms of work experience, opportunities where you have spent time in chambers, working around barristers, where you get to go to court and watch advocates in action. And in fact, you can just go into court, because if it's a public hearing, you're allowed to. And I always encourage students to go to court as much as they can and just familiarize themselves and become comfortable with being in that arena. So that's one of the things. The other things that I think are helpful is just meeting more barristers and lawyers, because again, you'll feel more comfortable, and applying for scholarships. And hopefully if you get a scholarship, that really helps. But I do think, and building up your CV is important because it's so competitive, but that really is the route. Once you've finished your pupillage, then hopefully you'll be successful in becoming a tenant in chambers, which it means you're a permanent member of chambers then, and you're on your way.
Yeah, so what does a pupillage actually mean?
Well, what it means, it's a bit like an apprenticeship where for a year you are training and applying the law that you've learned in your courses to actual real cases. You'll be shadowing, you'll be working with members of chambers who are
Yes.
barristers as your supervisors, going to court with them, working on papers, and really learning in real time, which is very different from a course.
Right.
And it's quite fast paced. And then in the second 6 months, you are on your feet, which means you are actually representing real clients in court.
Okay. So
So
someone has
that's,
to give you the opportunity to become somebody has to hire you. How do you sign up for pupillage?
so it's all via interviews. You
Okay.
apply, and then if you're selected, you go for an interview. And generally speaking, it's a first round interview and then a second round interview. And some of that process will involve you doing actual sort of not just interview questions, but assessments, such as, you know, a piece of advocacy or a piece of writing where they test your skills and knowledge.
And so this is at the end of your LLB course, I guess. You have to have a degree in law before you can apply to be a pupil.
You'd either have a degree in law or you'd done the GDL, which is a sort of transition course, which means you can then go on to study, and then you would do your bar practice finals. So you would have to do that, and then you'd be doing your pupillage. So it does take a good few years to get there, but I'd say it's well worth it.
Yes, and when we're studying law, we could study with another subject. So
Yes, you can. And I also think that's a really interesting dynamic to add to your sort of CV and your application.
yeah,
Lots of people have done law with languages or other humanities or other areas that just interest them. And I think that could be a really fascinating string to your bow. It gives you something to talk about at interviews, which is a bit different.
yeah,
And I always say anything that helps you to stand out so that the people doing the interviews remember you
yeah,
is actually very helpful. So I always encourage people to follow what their passions are. I'm sure they're very interested in law, but
yeah.
if they are also interested in other subjects, then maybe combine those two.
Yes, I have been recommending actually students that they combine it with things like even with business and with technology. Because
Yes.
even if you're running a business, you need to understand the law of the land and how to set up your corporation and follow the local laws. And globally as well, things are moving into a global arena now. And I think it helps to know what law you need to follow, what you don't need to follow, and even with technology, with new technology coming in, like even
Mm.
blockchain, etc. So people who understand the technology as well as the law are in high demand.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think knowledge of business, of commerce, of technology,
Yeah,
anything to do with change, also international aspects are going to be probably quite a good advantage. So yes, I think getting that knowledge, whether it's if it's part of your undergrad or
yeah,
if you're going to do a postgrad,
uh,
you could, that's another opportunity to specialize if you have a particular area of law you want to practice in, or just an interest that you'd like to really delve deeper into. So that could be useful, doing a postgrad, an LLM, or a master's of some kind.
yeah, sure. And you mentioned languages. Why is it such a good combination to do law with another language?
Well, it could be practical because you could be in your practice dealing with clients that are international, that are speaking different languages. Um, just in terms of the way we tend to work and travel,
Yeah,
not at the moment, but generally speaking, it can be so helpful to have other languages. So, yes, I've certainly never found it to have held back anyone who combined it with a language. So, I think if you're passionate, you're interested in languages, it could be quite an interesting and advantageous thing to do to combine it with language.
yeah. So I worked with a bank, it was a French bank earlier, and the lawyers there were a lot of them were sitting in France, and they knew both English law and French law because
Mm.
the operation was across Europe, and I think that put them in good stead, the knowledge of two languages and two sets of laws. So I think it's an advantage over somebody who knows only local a law, and you know, he is probably a bit more constrained than another person who's got the knowledge and flexibility to stretch a bit.
Yes, I
Go.
would agree. I think anything that gives you a bit of a cutting edge, makes you more dynamic,
Yeah.
is really useful in a career in the law. And just to sort of talk about the position for solicitors, it's very similar. It's just that you go a different route. But instead of um, going to bar school, studying actual, taking the bar finals, you're going to be taking the law finals, the Law Society finals, to become a solicitor.
Okay.
And instead of trying to get a pupillage, you'll be trying to get your training contract. And you'll be undergoing a similar process of application and interview. And then when you are a trainee solicitor, you'll be treated quite similar to, as I've described, as a trainee barrister in pupillage. On the job training, learning, working on real cases, being supervised by real practicing solicitors.
Sure.
So it's quite a similar process, but if you like, it's just a different route.
So being a barrister means you can represent your client in the court.
Yes. Yes.
So that means you probably need a set of different skills, or what does it entail? That, how do I make up my mind whether I should be a solicitor or a barrister?
That's a good point. I think that nowadays, actually, there are lots of opportunities for solicitors to do advocacy if they would like to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So you can, for example, solicitors can appear in courts and some of the lower courts and tribunals,
Okay.
and then they can also get the higher rights of advocacy if they want to appear in the higher courts. But I think the jobs are quite different in a way. I think if you're inclined to become a solicitor, you might actually want more hands-on day-to-day contact with clients, for example. Whereas if you're more inclined to be an advocate, you want to argue the cases, you want to be in court regularly, then you'll probably be drawn to the bar in the UK. And then your first client will actually be the solicitor. The solicitor will be the client instructing you, sorry, on behalf of the lay client. So you're not as directly in touch with the lay client as if you were a solicitor. So.
Right. Okay, great. And so I was reading up about the best areas of growth, the high growth areas in law. It seems like litigation, complex litigation is top of the charts right now in demand. And then there's corporate law, intellectual property law, healthcare. So in your opinion, is it simply based on complexity and demand for these skills, or what's driving these things? How is the market changing and why?
I think there's lots of complex reasons for that. I think that the stakes are getting higher in terms of complex litigation. You're seeing bigger and bigger cases being tried, in for longer periods of time. In, for example, the High Court, in particular.
Yeah.
And I think we have moved into that kind of domain. However, I feel that as someone coming into the profession, you should really follow what your particular interests and passions are, because you will be able to carve out your own niche into the areas that you want to practice in.
Sure.
So not necessarily what you think might be, a clever move, but what really interests you, because on a day-to-day basis, that's going to be what gets you out of bed and gets you into work. So I always say, just follow what your interests are and get as much experience about those areas as you can before you actually start working in the area. That's also really important, because you could be really interested in an area, then take some work experience in that area and realize, actually, it doesn't have that much contact with people. I thought there'd be more, or actually it's too much. I'd rather do something more esoteric. I want to, do IP or something like that. So it's useful to get that on the job, on the ground experience beforehand.
Sure. And these specializations, are they only picked up in the post-graduation, or is there a year dedicated in your LLB where you can actually pick up a specialization?
Yes, well, you can certainly pick up specializations on your undergraduate. So you can start that then, because usually, especially in the third year, you may get a chance to study particular areas that you choose. Some degrees have the extra year which then can also allow for specialization. So you can do it as an undergrad, and of course you can do it as postgrad. You might want to do something in human rights or international law, or anything really that's interesting to you. Philosophy, there's so many different things one could do. So that's another way you could get some sort of exposure into a specialized area of law. But also remember this, that when you start practicing as a lawyer, you may then decide to change your mind and go into different area of specialization altogether.
That's true.
So,
yes.
So I think it works in two ways. The specialization can help you to get into your career because it shows people that you're really interested in an area, you're very serious and committed.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you that advantage. But then once you're in the profession and working, you can then decide to stay in that area or go into other areas. So I think it just gives you perhaps an extra choice, but it doesn't mean you have to stick to that specialization either.
So what are some of the other ways of figuring out where you might be a good fit? Because it might be too late at the end of your specialization, and it's not that you don't have that much flexibility. So maybe people can read up, maybe they can meet different lawyers.
Yes.
What are some of the ways of figuring out what's right for me? Is it?
Well, I think this comes down to applying for work experience and undertaking work experience. So, for example, at the bar, we call them mini pupilages. And as a solicitor, they also do a very similar thing. They tend to be, they could be summer vacation programs, for example, where you can spend a good few weeks working in a law firm. So that, I think, is crucial to get an insight as to whether or not you get on with this area of law. Also, the people who are practicing it, it just exposes you to all of this. And I think the more experience, the more lawyers you meet, the more exposure to the law, the better. But as I said before, also just going to court and sitting in, a Crown Court, Magistrates Court, a tribunal, it could be employment tribunal, it could be immigration tribunal, but any of the open courts or tribunals that are, open to the public, you don't need to attend with a lawyer. You can just go in yourself. It's free, and you can watch, and you can see if you get a feel for this issue, this area of law, the issues involved, the styles of advocacy. You can really learn so much, and it's something that I did when I was very young as well, and I started doing that, going to court myself from the age of about 17. So I do think it's a really good thing to do.
And anybody can do that, go to whichever court they want to?
As long as it's an open court, you're entitled. You can even go to the Old Bailey and watch a murder trial.
About, let's say I'm interested in healthcare law. Can I find the old cases somewhere?
Yes, you can. So generally speaking, you should have access to libraries that will have a law section. So that's public libraries. You can do that. Or if you want to do research online, there are actual research facilities available, but you tend to have to pay a prescription to utilize some of the really famous ones. But there are free websites that have information on cases. So there's one called bailey.org, which is one that is free and has cases on there. You can also find from the government website, you've got employment tribunals, cases, other cases as well. So you can actually find quite a lot online for free by just researching and Googling a case. For example, if you Google a case name and you know the name of the case, you'll come up with various hits. Some of which will be reports, some of which will be somebody's written an article, but you can definitely read into cases like that. That's right.
So Elaine, coming back to your practical experience, you thought you were going to be a lawyer and this is what you would do. How did the real world appear different when you actually walked in and started? What was different, and was there something you thought you were great at, and some areas where you wanted to have more skills? What are the skills that came in most handy, really?
I think this is a really good question. So obviously you want to be a good student of the law and someone who has learned really well about the law and the areas that they're practicing in. But actually, when you're doing it in real time, it is different from learning just black letter law. You really have to think about the people you're working with.
Yeah.
You've got a relationship with those. It could be your clients, your solicitor and your lay clients, but also your opponent, the judge. All those people are individuals that you want to interact with, and build a good relationship skills. Part of it is your communication skills. Absolutely.
Both
So
written and spoken. Yeah.
written and spoken. So your written advocacy. I mean, sometimes you can win cases almost, I'd say almost all of it on your written advocacy by putting in a really good, strong skeleton argument and closing submissions. That can be essential in terms of advancing your case. So yes, written as well as oral. But again, as an advocate, part of it will be cross-examination. So you want to have good training on that, good understanding of that, and being able to react to what happens. That means you've got to really listen to the answers, think about how it's affecting your case, and then move on to the next issue so that you don't miss a really good point, because sometimes people are so hell-bent on what they've planned, they've missed out on what's actually just come from the witness's lips. So it is quite an art, it's quite a skill, but with practice you get better, which is why I also recommend to students to practice their oral advocacy skills. It doesn't mean you have to do necessarily mock trials, although mock trials are very helpful. Debating can be extremely good. I've actually found that some of the students that I've interviewed that were debaters had a real advantage, because it's very quick, it's very snappy, and when you're then being interviewed for a scholarship or pupillage, and I obviously take part in those interviews as a barrister, both of them for scholarships and interviews, those individuals that have debated have actually been quite quick on their feet, if you like. So I think anything where you're practicing public speaking, it's debating, speeching, or mock trials can be really helpful if you're interested in advocacy.
Yes. And what about things like critical thinking, being able to react on your feet, and analysis, communication, because the communication is stemming from the analysis he's done in his head.
You can't have one without the other. You have to have done your homework, your groundwork, your paperwork. You want to be master of the facts and the law, and then you put it all together. You've got to analyze it, you relate the facts to the law, and just try and inject some of yourself into it as well, if you can.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And how do you think people should go about their job search process? Early days,
Yes. I mean, it varies, because if you are going to be a barrister, you would have been applying for your pupillage, and then hopefully you'll get selected. And then at the end of that, hopefully you get taken on as a tenant. So that's really your job search. If you don't get taken on at that point, then you can apply to other chambers, and you may get taken on then. So that's how that works. Some people may then, if they didn't get taken on, they can, because you're a qualified barrister, you can work in-house, you can do other things, and then potentially come back to independent practice of the bar if you want to. But let's not forget that there's a whole wealth of careers out there. As an employed barrister, you can work for the government, you can work for big business, commerce, you can work in large investment banks. There's whole different, as general counsel, as barrister, employed, there's a whole other limb of practice. And the same goes as being a solicitor. You could work, you could decide to be in a firm, or you could decide to work in-house elsewhere. So you could be looking for jobs with recruitment consultants. There are recruitment consultants in the legal field that work for both barristers and solicitors. So that could be a very good way, I think, of looking for a job if you didn't get one at the end of your period of training. You could.
And how about building your own network? Does it help to network with?
Oh, yes. Networking is incredibly important. I mean, one of the things that I always mention is mentorship. I think for a student, aspiring lawyer, whether they're a barrister or a solicitor, getting hold of someone who will mentor you is really useful. So that is good. And connected to that, or outside of that, is the networking aspect. If you can build up your networks
Yeah.
of lawyers
Uh-huh.
and other aspiring, lawyers,
Yeah.
I think it helps you to just get more exposure, experience, and understanding of the law. And when you're looking for work, you have a network that you can reach out to. So you may find things like social media helpful,
Mhm.
such as LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That can also be a good way of obtaining future employment and roles and opportunities.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. I think it's been very, very interesting talking to you, and so many aspects have come out as a result of this discussion.
Happy to help and happy to talk again if it's helpful.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye bye.